Welcome to Michigan's World War I Centennial News Report for July 2015, World War I Cartoons. I'm your host, Dennis Skupinski. Besides World War I cartoons, we're also going to look at what happened 100 years ago during the war, and also you get a chance to hear me featured as a spotlight speaker on the World War I Centennial Commission's conference call.
Going to go straight into our volunteer spotlight. We're excited to reopen this. We haven't had a volunteer spotlight in a couple of weeks, but today hopefully we're going to hear from Dennis Skupinski from Michigan. He is our volunteer, our state outreach volunteer out there who's been working tirelessly for many years to try and get a World War I committee started in Michigan. Dennis, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We're so excited to hear from you and a little bit about your background and how you got involved and why World War I is important to you. Thanks, Dennis.
Okay, well, first of all, why World War I is important to me was I started collecting military uniforms and equipment back in the early 1970s as a kid, and I wanted to get involved, and I liked history, but there was a lot of people that were doing Civil War and World War II, but there didn't seem to be many people interested in World War I. So that I decided I was going to concentrate on World War I because I wanted to be different. And then about 25 years ago, I started getting serious about collecting. I started pulling out some of the uniforms and stuff I had from the late 60s and early 70s and started trying to focus. And so what I did was I focused on Western Front, enlisted people, and junior officers' combat uniforms. And so that's what my collection's basically built on. And about 3 years ago, I decided I was going to get involved with some activities that enhance my social network. So I decided to get involved with World War I and see if there's going to be a centennial. So I went to the State Historical Commission and didn't get much support there, and didn't get much support from the governor's office. And after about 3 years, finally I got in touch with the World War I Centennial Commission, and Rebecca Wilson helped me draft a letter, or we sent a letter to the state senator and the state assemblyman from my area, and now they're going to finally propose a legislation to have a World War I Centennial Commission in Michigan. We're still waiting for that the legislation and stuff to result, but right now at least they've agreed to do it, which was better than I've been able to do for the last 3 years. And one of the things I did back about 3 years ago when I realized it was going to be an uphill battle trying to get a Centennial Commission going was I started figuring out what's the best way to do this. And so I created a marketing plan, basically a grassroots program. And what I was going to do was I was going to use Facebook as my web page so I could put daily updates or as needed updates where people could go to and sign up and like and find out more about Michigan's World War I Centennial. I also added Flickr, which was basically my online museum of military uniforms and other things that I have. The third part of it was Michigan's World War I Centennial News Report, which is a monthly video which I broadcast on local cable access television, and also I put on YouTube. And what I do with this is I try to spotlight or highlight something involved with the First World War that Michigan contributed to. Like the first one was the poppy, and also about Armistice Day, and this was done back in June of 2012. And so what I focused on was why they chose the poppy, and then also about Armistice or Veterans Day. And Michigan's involvement with that was with DFW president at the time, in 1938, Eugene Van Antwerp, who lobbied a number of different states to get it passed as a national holiday. And just to give an example of what the format for these are, if you haven't watched them, what I do is I have what went on 100 years ago during the war, so people can see what important events there were. And then I do also a local, a statewide update if there's anything going on with the state as far as World War I events or something that people might be interested in. And then I also try to do a national update if there's anything nationally going on that people should be interested in. And then the main part of the program is something to do with Michigan and World War I. Like the last month, I just published was on the Grand Rapids Airplane Company, which was formed by 14 furniture manufacturers in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area. who decided they had a better chance of getting government contracts if they formed together. And what they did was they built over 285 Handley-Page 0400 English bombers there. And another one, which I'm working on in the future, is War Gardens. And the way I'm relating that to Michigan was the person who started the War Gardens movement and was the head of the government agency for that was Charles Lathrop Pack, who his first 14 years he grew up in Ludington, Michigan, and then he moved to Cleveland. So if Cleveland wants to take credit for him, they can have him too. But the War Gardens was real important because they wanted to save nitrate, which they use in ammunition. They wanted to save transportation, which would save gas, and also vehicle space and train space by having people grow their own fruits and vegetables locally. And they just continued on in World War II as the Victory Gardens, and now they do it basically as organic gardening and local sourcing gardening. So this is something I'm doing for like February of 2016 because I had to take pictures of seedlings, of building a greenhouse, a small little greenhouse, and now I'm taking pictures of the plants growing through the years. So by February of 2016, I'll have the complete cycle, and I'll be able to publish it for Michigan's WW1 Centennial News Report. And so I decided rather than waiting for people to form a commission and stuff, I just take it on my own and run with it. And, you know, this way they're going to have some documentation of what went on in Michigan during the First World War and what we did, how we're commemorating it. And this way it's not an end to, you know, like scholarly work because there's a lot more research that could be involved, but it's just trying to get the populace involved.
Dennis, that is so great. Thank you so much for all of your hard work out there in Michigan. This is exactly the kind of grassroots, campaign we've been trying to encourage other states to do. We appreciate your persistence, and we're so glad that you found us, and we can try to help you along and get Michigan stood up. So thank you. Thank you very much.
On July 7, 1915, the First Battle of the Isonzo ended. The battle was between the Italian armies and that of the Austro-Hungarian army. It was fought in the Isonzo River Valley. More than 10 battles would be fought in this same area. Also on July 7, 1915, the Italian Navy took a loss with the Italian cruiser Amalfi being sunk by an Austrian submarine. It was actually a German submarine that was shipped by rail and constructed on the Adriatic coast and manned by a German crew. On July 9, 1915, German Southwest Africa capitulates to General Botha of the South African Army. This was the first of Germany's African colonies that would fall to the British. On July 11, 1915, the German light cruiser Königsberg was destroyed in the river Rufiji. She was scuttled by her crew, and this is in German East Africa. 2 British monitors had been sent to chase her down in the shallow river delta area. The Königsberg had been in German East Africa since April of 1914 when she was sent there on a 2-year deployment. When war broke out in August of 1914, she became a commerce raider. She only sank 1 ship during her career. On July 18, 1915, the Second Battle of the Isonzo begins. Also, the Italian cruiser Giuseppe Garibaldi was sunk by the Austrian submarine in the Adriatic. This is the second large Italian warship that was sunk by Austrian submarines. On July 25, 1915, Nasiriyah, which is in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, was taken by British forces. World War I cartoons. One of the aspects that makes the First World War unique was the use of cartoons to either confirm a policy or oppose a policy. And because so many men served in the military, the use of cartoons made fun of military life. We will examine some famous and some not so famous cartoonists of the First World War. Louis Raemaekers was a Dutch painter and editorial cartoonist for the Amsterdam newspaper De Telegraaf during World War I and was noted for his anti-German stance. He was one of the fiercest critics when the Germans invaded neutral Belgium. He portrayed the Germans as barbarians and Kaiser Wilhelm II as an ally of Satan. His works were confiscated several times by the Dutch government, and they also complained that he endangered their neutrality. In November of 1915, he left Amsterdam for London. The most important aspect of Raemaekers' career was his role as an Allied propagandist. Soon after he arrived in London, he was contacted by Britain's War Propaganda Bureau, the Wellington House. 40 of his most captive cartoons were published in Raemaekers Cartoons and were immediately translated into 18 languages and distributed worldwide. From the summer of 1916 onwards, his efforts were made to the most powerful neutral countries, the United States, at the request of the Wellington House. In 1917, while touring the United States declared war on Germany. Raemaeker gave lectures and interviews and drew characters for the movie cameras, and was the most popular guest at social functions, and met President Wilson and former President Theodore Roosevelt. Soon after his arrival, to everyone's surprise, he signed a contract with International News Service, which was owned by William Randolph Hearst. The Hearst newspapers were viewed as pro-German because they were cut off from the Allied news. But Raemaeker's theory for this was that this was the most important group of readers because they were daily poisoned by the tenacious articles that were pro-German. In October of 1917, more than 2,000 American newspapers had published his cartoons and made hundreds of millions of copies. Bruce Bairnsfahter was an English cartoonist. In 1914, he joined the Royal Worcestershire Regiment as a second lieutenant and served in the machine gun unit until he was wounded in 1915. He was hospitalized for shell shock during the Second Battle of Ypres. While he was recovering, he was assigned to the 34th Division headquarters on Salisbury Plain in England. That's where he developed his humorous series for the bystander, Life in the Trenches, featuring Old Bill, an old soldier with a trademark walrus mustache and balaclava. Many of his early cartoons were collected in Fragments from France, and another autobiographical, Bullets and Billets, which came out in 1916. Despite the immense popularity with the troops and massive sales increased by the bystander, initially there were objections to his vulgar caricatures. Nevertheless, their success in raising morale to Bairnsfahter's promotion and receipt of the War Office appointment to draw similar cartoons for the Allied forces. During World War II, he was no longer needed for the English war effort. Instead, he was the official cartoonist for the American forces in Europe, contributing to Stars and Stripes and Yank. He also drew cartoons at American bases and nose art on American aircraft. His works are considered to have influenced artists such as Bill Mauldin, World War II cartoonist. Before and during the First World War, American cartoonists were hard at work, making points about American policy of neutrality or about certain individuals such as Henry Ford. In late 1915, Henry Ford organized and launched his amateur peace mission to Europe. Ford chartered the Oscar II and invited prominent peace activists to join him. He hoped to create enough publicity to prompt the belligerent nations into convening a peace conference and mediating an end to World War I, but the mission was widely mocked by the press, which referred to the Oscar II as a ship of fools, as well as a peace ship. Infighting between the activists, mockery by the press contingent on board, and an outbreak of influenza marred the voyage. These are a sampling of some of the cartoons that the press did on Henry Ford and his peace mission. One of the most unique experiences of the young men during the First World War was that of military life. Most of these young soldiers were raised on a farm and never went more than 25 miles from where they were born. So combining these soldiers of same age, hundreds of miles away from their home, produced interesting results, as we can see in some of these cartoons. The military, once they organized the men, had to feed, clothe, and house them, and then ship some of them a couple thousand miles away to fight a war in a different country where they didn't speak the same language. This produced a number of interesting situations that the American soldier, who became a cartoonist, often drew about. The cartoons here were presented by amateur cartoonists. They were either in camp newspapers or unit histories, and they present some of the interesting sides of military life. One of the most famous military cartoonists from the First World War was the Marine private Abian Wallgren. A native of Philadelphia, A. Wallgren was to World War I what Bill Mauldin was to World War II. After joining the Marine Corps in 1917, his talents led him to work as a sign painter for military vehicles and facilities throughout France, and he eventually was recruited by Stars and Stripes. Legend has it that Wallgren was notoriously ill-suited for military life, and especially to all the responsibilities requiring deadlines and punctuality, even for his cartooning work. On multiple occasions, he was under military discipline for drunkenness or smuggling cognac into the barracks, and arriving late or not at all to particular posts. However, it's clear that the AEF venerated him for his cartoon work. Whether they had to hold him captive at his drawing table until he finished his latest cartoon, a true story retold by one of his contemporaries, or they had to track him down at bistros located throughout Paris to beg him to draw, Private Abian Wallgren was a favorite cartoonist of the American Expeditionary Force in France. He managed to capture Army life and put it on paper, much to the amusement of the American soldier. The first Wally cartoon was in Stars and Stripes, February 8, 1918, and the last was June 13, 1919. During the war, Wally bombarded the troops with comedic commentary. Given the precious circumstances in which his readers found themselves, they were surely more keenly appreciative of the cartoonist's witty contrivances in their heightened state of self-consciousness than they might have been back home. Back home, they wouldn't have been threatened with hourly cannon fire and wouldn't most likely be quite as thankful for things that could take their minds off their discomforts. Wally, during the First World War, to this American expeditionary soldier in France, was a figure of some renown, and anybody who lived through those muddy months remembers him. But Wally the cartooning doughboy was seemingly, if we are to judge from the formal historical record of cartooning in that neighborhood of the century, thoroughly forgotten sometime between the end of the First World War and his death in 1948. During World War II, the cartooning soldier celebrities became civilian celebrities after the war, like Bill Mauldin characters Willie and Joe. Wallgren's character Wally was forgotten after the war. After the war, most units put out a unit history, whether it was a company history of about 200 men, a regimental history of about 1,000, or a division history which included about 20,000 soldiers. In those unit histories, a lot of times there were cartoons such as the ones you're seeing here. It's regarding Army life. The unit histories were designed to tell the story of what the unit did during the Great War. The cartoonists came along and had a chance to tell the story of what it was like to be in this unit, what it was like everyday soldiers doing kitchen police, stable police, drill, being in the front line combat, and any other situations that came up. These cartoonists saw the lighter side of Army life and put it down on paper. The First World War was the first war in which unit histories and cartoons became prevalent. As you look at these cartoons from a regiment of artillery from Fort Custer, located by Battle Creek, Michigan, you can see the humorous side of Army life and the common experiences that soldiers of the American Expeditionary Force went through, whether it was in training camp, on the way to France, in France, or on the way home. During the First World War, cartooning evolved to a new level, not just to support and oppose political positions or candidates, but it made fun of everyday life, especially Army life. This carried on into the civilian world after the war.